September 12th, 2024, marking 100 years since the birth of Amilcar Cabral, the great revolutionary leader of liberation struggles in both Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde. How did the recent Amilcar Cabral Centenary Symposium, I guess, aim to highlight Cabral's contributions to anti-colonial struggle and revolutionary thought? And in what ways do you feel like this event might have, or worked to, or thought to inspire current and future generations of activists and freedom fighters?
And I would try to do my best, but I don't have the words to describe it all. I'm very inspired by it, and like other people, the fact that Amilcar Cabral, when he made his physical transition, he didn't have money in the bank accounts, he didn't have a house, he didn't have fancy cars, but yet and still, when you do a survey among historians and sociologists and political observers, they choose him to be one of the people that had the most impact on humanity since the beginning of all times. You probably know that the BBC did a survey with historians a couple of years ago, and of all the people who were named, they named like Mansa Musa, the Emperor Mali, who was the richest man in the world at the time. And they named people like Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill. But Cabral got 25% of the votes. So he's considered to be from those that he interviewed, the second most important historical figure of all times. Whereas Mansa Musa, who was the richest man in the world at that time, had about 8% of the votes. And other people like Winston Churchill, Abraham, they had money, and they were presidents of country. Cabral was never president of a country. The fact that the Amilcar Cabral Centenary has been commemorated in many countries: Senegal, Cape Verde, Portugal. Portugal was the colonial master in the South, but they celebrate Cabral. Even the school he went to, they had a big celebration. And another celebration in another place in Portugal, in Angola twice, and Luxembourg and France, and in New York in Times Square they had a big screen, a couple of screens with Cabral, the flag in the South, commemorating Amilcar Cabral. So I think the lesson that this shows us is that if you want to be great and have eternal life, you don't need to put seeking money to become rich materially as your priority. Be humble, be honest, have undying love for your people, and organize the masses. That's what Cabral did. Cabral was very cultural person. When we say culture, we mean the relationship between men and women as a whole and nature, and then the relationship between men and women and men and women. Well, Cabral was born at a time when the first imperialist war had just ended in 1970. You call it World War One, 1917. He was born in 1924, 7 years later. But as a teenager, the second imperialist war began, World War Two in 1939. So it's about 15 years, 15 years old at the time. So he was able to see that. But at the same time, he was born in Guinea-Bissau, which was colonized. His father's a teacher. His father is the one who gave him the name Amilcar. If you look back in history, one of the greatest military strategies of all time is called Hannibal the Great of Northern Africa. At that time, they used to call it Carthage. Now we call that parts of Tunisia and Libya. His father was Amilcar, who was also a great military strategist who was fighting against Roman Empire invasions of Europe and Africa. So he gave him a very historical name. He was born in a time when the society politically was dominated by imperial powers. Then, as a young boy, at the age of 8, he moved with his father to Cape Verde, where his father was born. And Cape Verde was going through a serious dry season, drought. As a result of the drought, 50,000 people died in 1 year. So can you imagine being a young teenager seeing 50,000 people die? And thousands left Cape Verde because of this drought. So that's one of the main reasons that he looked at this natural phenomenon, the impact it had on society. Said, I want to be an agronomist engineer so I can provide a solution to things like this drought. If you see that I'm wearing a cap, I'm wearing a shirt, it's because of agriculture. If I'm drinking juice, lemon juice, eating rice and fish, it's because of agriculture. Well, fish, is a part of pisciculture. So he decided to provide a solution for that. That's why he decided to study agriculture. But at the same time, the relationship between man and woman, in the high school that he went to, he was the president of the Student Association. He was involved also in sports and poetry, really a lot of poetry. But he was one of the 100 students in the 5 colonies of Africa that were colonized by the Portuguese in their desperate attempt after the end of World War II. The desperate attempt was to try to take a few Africans to Portugal to transform them to be like black Portuguese. But out of the 100 students that got their scholarships from Mozambique, Angola, Saint Tomé, Cape Verde, and Guinea-Bissau, 60 of them transformed into revolutionaries. Because what they would do was they were very good students. Cabral was one of the best in his class, even though he's the only African in his class. Huh? He got the average of 90% of all the results. As I said, they used to have the instead of having 0 to 100, they had 0 to 20. You also get 19, 18. In fact, the professors at the school said he was one of the best students. But at the same time, after class, he would go have meetings in a type of work study where they would study Africa, study philosophy, study history of the world, and look for solutions to the problems confronting the world. And he became active in some of the anti-fascist movements going on at the time in Portugal. After graduating, he did some agricultural work inside of Portugal and said, I'm going back to Africa. He could have went back to Cape Verde. Or he could have went to another part of Africa that's a lot richer than Guinea-Bissau, because Guinea-Bissau still is one of the poorest countries in Africa. Even though we're rich though, but relatively speaking, one of the poorest and one of the smallest. But he had a vision in mind. But he not only came back to Guinea-Bissau, but he also went to Angola. And then Angola helped to form a party, a Pan-Africanist party in 1953. With the comrades, they went to school with Lucio Lares, Maria Andrade, Pinto. They formed the Partido de Luta Unido de Africanos Angola, the United Party of Struggle of Africans in Angola. He didn't say Angolans, the Africans in Angola. In Guinea-Bissau, they formed secretly the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. One party for 2 different countries. Now, some of you might think the Cape Verde Islands are small islands off the coast of Guinea-Bissau. No, Cape Verde is far from Guinea-Bissau. It's closer to Dakar, Senegal, than it is to Guinea-Bissau. But they were colonized by the same colonial master. At first, the colonial master used to sit in Cape Verde and administrate Guinea-Bissau. So he said that the enemy divides us to conquer, so we must unify to beat the enemy. In 1953, he also did an agricultural survey in Guinea-Bissau, which allowed him to use the resources of the colonialists to go throughout the country to every village to visit them under the guise that he was surveying the agriculture, what type of crops do they grow, etc. But he used that to get to know the people. What are their uses and customs? How does culture? How do they manifest culture in the areas? What type of structures do they have? They have social structures. They have vertical structures or they have horizontal structures. As a result of getting to know them very well, when the, when there was a massacre in Guinea-Bissau, at a port called PAIGC on the 3rd of August, 1959, the party met and said, okay, this tactic, this strategy we have been using to say organize the workers, the urban areas will not work for us under our reality. It might have worked for other parties in European countries, but not in Guinea-Bissau. The overwhelming majority of the people are peasants, workers, urban, rural workers. Let's go to the countryside. And it wasn't abstract for Cabral because he already had the opportunity to live among our people and study our people to see what they see their high level of intelligence. Whereas other people might have looked at the rural workers, the farmers, what some people call peasants, and said, well, these people are illiterate, they're ignorant. How can you organize with them? They don't have a high level of culture. But I would say, on the contrary, even though 99% of our people never have been to a colonial school, they're very intelligent. They have high levels of culture. Their culture hasn't been really tempered much by the imperialists. In fact, he said it's inside the forest that our culture has been maintained. And that's one of the main reasons that the PIDC worked miracles. If it was in 1950s or the 1940s and we were talking about the Guinea-Bissau, and you said to me, Tunda, if you said to me, do you know in 1963 the mass of people in Guinea-Bissau will organize themselves and pick up guns and beat not only the Portuguese colonists but the NATO supporters, the guns and missiles that come from napalm that comes from the United States of America, the machine guns that come from France, the hand grenades and everything that comes from the helicopters that come from Germany, the weapons they get from Italy, the weapons they get from Britain. I said, man, I don't know about this now. How can these people who are overwhelmingly 99% illiterate organize themselves to defeat NATO? But they did it because of our culture, because that was the vision that Amilcar Cabral and others had to organize our people around our culture. And so some of those who were considered to be quote unquote revolutionary petty bourgeois, who came from the urban centers, when they had to go inside the country to be among the people, they were shocked. The high level of intelligence, the high level of cultural manifestations that our people have, their ability to make logical arguments and to grasp hold to new ideas very quickly, to resolve problems very quickly based upon our culture. Just about every sentence is like a proverb. So for us, we think that Amilcar Cabral helped to give a lesson to the world that you must organize a mass party, not just a popular party where you have the mass of people inside of a party, but they're not just no. He said let's organize at the base, where each base. And the other thing was at that time, there was a lot of strong patriarchy. I'm not saying it's eliminated, but it's been reduced. There's a lot of super strong patriarchy in our villages. We have some ethnic groups that consider women to not be human beings, but to be like property to exchange for cows. So you might have a daughter, exchange your daughter for X amount of cows to a rich man. But that party came along and said, no, in each of the bases that we're going to organize in the village, of the five leaders of the base, at least two, minimally two have to be women. It could be three, it could be four, but you can't have one. You have to have at least two. And begin to say, okay, now, once they begin the armed phase of their struggle in 1963, called the people with arms militants, armed militants, the people with arms, not military. And every time they would liberate a territory, they said we must put schools there. Some people said, put schools there during a war. How can you protect the students? How can you protect the teachers? Cabral said, if we don't put schools, it's worthless, not worthwhile to liberate the territory because we have to help transform our people politically as well as technologically and technically. And in the school system, the smartest students in the fifth grade will get a scholarship to go to Conakry, the capital of Guinea. At that time, it was called the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, led by the PDGRDA with Ahmed Secretariat as the president and the secretary general of the party. So in Conakry, that's where the PIDC had its main secretariat. They had a pilot school next to it. But with the girls, you don't wait till the fifth grade. In the third grade, the girls were given a scholarship and they would give a double. They wouldn't have to study the fourth grade. They go straight to study the fifth grade with the boys. And in the school, they would do all the chores together, clean up together, fetch water together, wash dishes together, cook together, sew together, etc. And of course, they were given a very revolutionary curriculum. And sometimes Cabral would go teach some classes. So they took some of the better of the PIDC militants and responsibles and had them teach. They said this would be the motto of the school system that we will put in Guinea-Bissau after we take back our administration. So you had hundreds of schools implanted throughout the country. And then in every synagogue, even though Senegal was a neo-colonial state, of course, if they caught the PIDC militants with guns, they would arrest them. They allowed us to have a little model school there too. So, and inside the deliberate zones, we had another pilot school. So, objective of this pilot school was to create that nucleus of new men and women, the revolutionaries that would come to lead the new administration. So, they, of course, they had to have scholarships to go to countries like mainly socialist countries like the Soviet Union, Algeria, Ghana, the Eastern Bloc countries like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, etc., Cuba, to be trained as technical technological cadre. So it'd be political cadre and technological cadre. At the same time, the liberated zones created what is kind of like a nucleus of a new state with people stores where you would trade articles. So if you're growing cotton and I'm growing groundnuts, then we can trade those. Other people are growing or weaving the fabric, they can trade it for a radio or others, different trade different things without money. Huh? Educational system where teachers would teach without getting money. They would have a place to stay, clothes to wear, food to eat, and they would teach with enthusiasm. Not living, not teaching to live, but living to teach. Our own judicial system, where the people themselves would have judicial committees, and if the case was, if one of the parties that was being judged was not satisfied, they can appeal the case to a sectional judicial committee. If they're not satisfied, they can appeal it to a sectoral judicial committee. If they're not satisfied, the sectoral let it go to the regional. If they're not satisfied, they go to the central. So the people themselves administrating their own justice, having our own international independent policy with the other countries of the world and other organizations of the world. So we hit the nucleus of a new state, creating a new man and a woman. So these things that made Cabral so special to us, and he would always, very often, go to the front lines to encourage those who were fighting, and even held a Congress while the war was going on to resolve some of the contradictions that emerged during the struggle. Just as an example, you had some or militants that look themselves as being military. So because they were like the commander of a group, they would try to have them be like their lackeys, try to go to villages and take advantage of women, things like that. Cabral said, this is not what we're fighting for. So it called for Congress to discipline them. And he disciplined them. Of course, some had to lose their lives physically, but to put the part, let the all the activists, especially the responsibles, know that we're in a revolution. We're not fighting for a flag, for identity card to say, now this is a independent. No, we're in a revolution to transform our society. And at the same time, struggling not only for Guinea-Bissau, but had coordination. They call it political military coordination of the PAIGC, which is for Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde, as well as the MPLA, which Cabral is one of the co-founders of in Angola, and Frelimo, the Liberation Front of Mozambique, which Cabral helped influence its foundation, and the MLSTP, the Movement for the Liberation of Sentiment and Principle, which is islands close to Gabon, which were colonized by the Portuguese as well. So for the first time in history of Africa, you had a Pan-African instrument that was coordinating a liberation struggle across state lines. And at the same time also coordinating with the Conference of Independent African Countries, which was being coordinated by Kwame Nkrumah, secretary at that time. Of course, he attended all the All African People's Conference, the one that happened in Ghana, Tunisia, Egypt. And then now went to Cuba in 1966 for the first Tricontinental Conference, where you had some of the best revolutionary organizations of Africa, of Asia, and Latin America meet in Havana, Cuba in January 1966. And his presentation was considered one of the best presentations. And just about all the delegates went to meet with Cabral, And Fidel Castro said, in front of all of them, he said, the most brillante and claro de Africa es compañero Amilcar Cabral. The most brilliant and clear of Africa is comrade Amilcar Cabral. So they founded an international organization called the Organization of Solidarity of the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, OSPAL, OSPAAL, OSPAL. Cabral was one of the co-founders of that. So he founded an organization for Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, founded an organization for Angola, influenced organization in Mozambique, and at the same time, the one in Santa May had their office in Conakry, close by the PH office, and most of the leaders and responsible of the MLSTP of Santa May, then Cabral was one who was really their leader. And then I became a co-founder of a coordination body for the liberation movements of Angola, the front for Mozambique, and the PAIGC for Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde and Saint Tome, and a co-founder of the OSPAL at the level international, which was, was co-founded also by people like Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, Mao Zedong of China, etc. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara. Che wasn't there physically, but he's the one that organized the conference. But Fidel was there physically. So you have this humble, simple African who organized at that time. And we didn't have internet at that time. We did all of this then. And then he was able to make nice, very strong analysis. Like, for example, at the conference in Cuba, of course, a lot of the agenda talk about the class struggle, this, the class struggle, that, the class struggle, the motive is. That's true. Cabral said, this is true. He said, but we had to analyze this even deeper. There was a time when classes didn't exist in humanity. They began to later emerge little by little. So we're saying that before that time, we didn't have history? People laugh. I understand the Chinese really laughed. And he said, we're struggling for communism to get rid of classes. So one day we'll get rid of classes. So will history end then? He said, whoa. He said, in Guinea-Bissau, where I'm coming from, we have ethnic groups. They have horizontal structures. They don't have classes. Are they outside of history? They also have the same type of ethnic groups in Angola. I know, I've been there. He said, I'm sure you probably have some here in Latin America. You all could tell us about that. Are these people outside of history? So, man, some of the greatest organized, the greatest revolution in the world had to think. What is he talking about? He said, we must admit that when there are classes, it's the class struggle that moves us forward, moves history forward. Like right now, we have classes in most parts of the world, but not everywhere in the world. It must be the modes of production that makes it's the motive force of history. What is the mode of production? The productive forces and the regime of distribution. And of course, if you look at those two, it's the productive forces is the main element that moves history forward. Because if you don't have any productive force at all, then when you come to distribute, you don't have anything to distribute. So people are like, wow, this is a serious revision he made to history. But if you look at also his works around national liberation and culture, just to give an example, where he would like to really strongly encourage you to meet this online, to read it. It's online. It's online in English, Portuguese at least, probably in French too, but for sure in English and in Portuguese. And national liberation and culture, which was a presentation, I consider it to be a thesis that Cabral presented in 1970 at Syracuse College in New York, in the US. The professor in Syracuse used the fact that Eduardo Mondlane, who was the founder of Frelimo, used to teach at Syracuse. And they also have an Eastern African Studies course. So now Cabral is from West Africa, right? But they used to excuse the fact that Cabral had a relationship with Eduardo Mondlane to bring him to speech. But his speech was not really directed at the students or professors of Syracuse. It's directed to the liberation movements. The main point that he wanted to bring out is it's the fact that liberation movements are really, in fact, culture. They're the politically organized manifestation of the people's culture. Because culture, as he said, it's an agronomist, right? He said it's like the flower of a plant, or if you want, like the fruit of a tree. You have a mango tree. The tree is like our history. The mango fruit is like our culture. The seed of the mango is like our ideology. Our ideology comes from our culture, and our culture comes from our history. But at the same time, this culture moves history forward. It's because of culture that we struggle. If they wouldn't have a high level culture, we wouldn't struggle. We just accept all the domination. And he pointed out that the enemies can never control a society unless they wipe out the culture. But how can you wipe out the culture? Unless you kill all the people. If you kill all the people, who you colonize? So they say, okay, we'll try assimilation. But after 500 years presence of Portuguese colonialists in Guinea-Bissau, not even 1% of the population were considered to be assimilated. That's to say, to think that they're black Portuguese. Not even 1%. So he also pointed out that we don't have a one culture. We have different levels of culture, and our objective now is to bring these different levels together to create what we consider to be a Guinea-Bissau culture and an African culture. We have this flag that we call African culture, but in all honesty, that's not one African culture. They're different levels. And how do you do that? The people have to know each other. They have to control their history. When we control, how do you control your history? You have to liberate the productive force, the mode of production. We still haven't done that yet, huh? We have independence, but we don't have the mode of productions under our control. Cabral said we must control the modes of production without any type of foreign or domestic dominion. But we still have that foreign dominion and even some national domination. So we must clear that our struggle is to liberate our productive force, our modes of production. And how you do that? You have to organize the masses of the people. And you have to have constant political and cultural education. There's no other way. So this is the one of I think one of the reasons why the world is not only celebrating Cabral the 100th anniversary of his birth, but have given a lot of respect to him. There are a number of schools that have been formed in Ghana. The West Africa People's Organization, which was founded 2 years ago, has a school there. They call it the Amilcar Cabral School. In Cuba, you have Amilcar Cabral School. You have Amilcar Cabral study circles. Many places. In Nigeria, I've had the opportunity to visit one in Ghana. I had the opportunity to visit one in Nigeria twice. They call it the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School Movement. They said they're Africans in Nigeria. They're not Nigerians. They're African in Nigeria. Many countries in the world have tributes to Cabral. With the centenary, the University of Havana had a nice symposium on the 12th. We had a very nice symposium here also in Bafata. We had a number of comrades come from various parts of the world, from Asia, different parts of Africa, to give their presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, they had centenary symposiums in Europe, in Latin America, Venezuela, for example. I know for sure. I told you about Cuba as well. The US. So it will continue. We're going to have tomorrow is the 19th of September, which is the 68th anniversary of the foundation of the PAI, African Party of Independence, which later put GC. Let people know, no, it's for Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde, but it's the African Party of Independence, a Pan-African party, whose program since the 1960s has 9 points. The first point says the total liberation of Guinea-Bissau, the total liberation of Cape Verde, the unification of the people of Guinea-Bissau, unification of the people of Cape Verde, unification of the people of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde is a nucleus for African Union. The unification and with socialism, unification of Africa, socialism for Africa, liberation of Africa, solid organization and coordination with all the anti-imperialist forces in the world to build socialism in the world. It's Pan-Africanism. When Cabral was assassinated in 1973 on the 20th of January, the enemy thought he was dead. The party, the PAIGC, showed the world that no, you shot Cabral, but Cabral is still alive. They intensified the armed struggle and won it. And as a result of winning that, helped to bring about a revolution in Portugal itself. Do you know of any other liberation movement in the world that not only did they liberate themselves unilaterally, but held voter registration, had a census, and then had elections while the war was still going on, where the people themselves elected their legitimate representative, and it was the people's representative said, this is our constitution, this is the structure of our national history, and we unilaterally proclaim the independence, the existence of the Republic of the South. And then the same liberation movement controlled by a party brought about a revolution inside of the metropole. I don't know of any. It might exist. But I looked through all the countries that were colonized by the British, those who got independence, but I don't know any that brought about a revolution in Britain because the same capitalist regime, semi-monarchical regime still exists in Britain. I don't know any former colony of France that did it. I know, like for example, Guinea-Conakry, they got independence totally, but they didn't bring about a revolution inside of France, unfortunately, because we still got that same riding capitalist imperialist regime in France. It still has colonies. I don't know about any that wants to did it in Spain because you still got a monarchy in Spain. I don't know any other country, but Guinea-Bissau. Don't believe me. Check on the internet for those who used to be Portuguese soldiers or those who used to be authorities in the new state of Portugal that resulted from the what they call the Coronation Revolution of the 25th of April, 1974. They said, thank you, Cabral. And when the revolution took place in Portugal, they overturned their fascist state, the new regime, which was not a socialist regime, wasn't a party, it was a mixture. But the people were demanding our fathers, our brothers are being killed in wars in Africa. and we don't have money. You're spending all this money over there because of NATO. We want to stop the war. So the reason that we got to stop the war. How can we stop the war? Let's talk to the PIGC because they've already unilaterally proclaimed independence, even though it wasn't really the PIGC. The PIGC organized the census, the elections, the voter registration, and the elections. And in the of the 120 deputies to elected, the representatives of the people, 40 were proposals from the PIGC. The other 80 were proposals just from the general population. So you go to a village, okay, I want to nominate my uncle. I want to nominate this brother over here. Oh, this is a good sister. The population nominated 80 of them. The PIC nominated 40, but it was the people voted for 120. And it was the 120 that went to the eastern part of the country while the war was still going on. They actually were supposed to go to the south, but the Portuguese heard about it, so they started intensifying their bombings. So they went to the east, and they met on the 23rd of September, and they said, "This is the constitution that we proposed and we agreed upon. Tomorrow, come back and let's do our first historical act. Vote on the independence of Guinea-Bissau." So the next day, on the 24th of September, 1973, the person who was the president of the table, the head table of the National People's Assembly, said, "Well, we have a proposal here for the independence of the independence of this country and call it the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Who's in favor?" All hands went up. Who's against? Nobody. Who abstains? Nobody. Okay, so we announced to the world that there's a new state called the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Less than 1 minute later, Guinea Congress said, "We agree with this. We're going to accept your independence. We recognize your independence." Within 24 hours, 79 countries recognized the independence, the existence of Guinea-Bissau. So the United Nations had no choice but to admit Guinea-Bissau as a member with full rights in the United Nations while the war was still going on. So Guinea-Bissau then was considered to be an independent country with foreign occupation, just like you have foreign occupation in countries like Libya, for example, and you have foreign occupation here. So when the new regime came into place after the 25th of April 1974, that's when they called for the PIC to meet with them. They met secretly in Senegal, then they met in London, and they met again in Algeria. The first two meetings, they didn't come to a conclusion because the new regime was kind of split. Some of them said, well, Guinea-Bissau is independent. We don't have anything to say about that. We recognize that. The, the representatives of the party went there said, we don't just want you to recognize the independence of Guinea-Bissau. It exists. More than 80 countries have recognized independence. You'll be with the 80 something. But we want you to make a text saying that you're to blame. It's because your racism, your fascism, your in colonialism that you brought back, you brought suffering to the people of Guinea-Bissau, and the people of Guinea-Bissau were correct, were legitimate for resisting against it. We also want you to recognize the independence of Cape Verde, the independence of Angola, the independence of Mozambique, the independence of Santo Domingo and Principe. So somebody said, well, I don't think that Cape Verde is ready for independence. They should probably just have some autonomy. Angola is really rich and it's very big, and how can we survive? Then let's have some type of cooperation. The PIDC delegates say, if you don't recognize the independence, we're going to start shooting again. He said, oh, and we got some Portuguese still in our prisons. Okay, no, we meet again. When they met in Algeria 50 years ago, on the 26th of August, 1974, they agreed with everything that the PIDC said, and they signed an accord. They call it the Accord of Algiers, where they said that we will have a meeting of the National Assembly in Portugal, and it will recognize. It won't just be us; it'll be the state, the representative of the people of Portugal who recognize the independence of Guinea-Bissau on the 10th of September, and by the 30th of October, we'll take out all of our stuff, all of our people, everything we have there. And then on the 25th of June, we'll recognize the independence of Mozambique. On the 12th, on the 5th of July, we'll recognize the independence. And on the 11th of November, we'll recognize the independence of Angola. Now in Angola, you had three different movements. You had the MPLA fighting. That's the one that Cabral co-founded and is our ally. And then you had the reactionaries, UNITA, controlled by the CIA and the racists out of South Africa, and also Zaire, led by the worst African ever born, anti-African, Mobutu Sese Seko. But you also had the FLN of holding Roberto, which was all supported by Mobutu and by the United States at the same time. So yeah, all three of them were fighting. So the agreement was on the Portuguese side, whichever one of those is in Luanda, the capital of Angola, on the 11th of November, that'll be the government that we'll work with. So, of course, the MPLA being the legitimate representative of the people in Angola and the ally of the PAIGC sent some forces to help them. Cuba sent some forces to help them. Of course, now the reaction was that the racists in South Africa invaded Angola to try to stop that from happening, but they weren't successful. So the history of Africa changed by the MPLA being in Rwanda and proclaiming the independence of the Popular Republic of Angola. Now, there's some other stories about Angola, but that's not directly relevant to what we're talking about today. But I just want to say this is all a result of Amilcar Cabral, of course, other people. You know, we don't believe you have one great man without the people. No, we're historical materialists. But we want to emphasize the role of individuals. You know, like our elders say, the best of our culture at any point in time can go forward by all the people, some of the people, or even one of the people. That's not to say one person can move the culture forward all the time, no, but in any microsecond, which is why every individual should always be faithful to our culture and move it forward. Cabral was one of those, the true representative of our culture. He didn't invent things. He observed our reality and he stayed faithful to our culture, faithful to our people. And of course, he was intelligent and tireless and a very humble person. He knew all of those students by their names. So, Comrade Kuba, how you feeling now? I heard you had a little fever the other day. Comrade Yama, how you feeling now? I heard that you fell down. And how are the teachers teaching you? They teach you all well? Know all the teachers by name. And when he goes to the village, you know, he remembers everybody's name. So he gave everybody special attention. Uh, he never talked. You never hear about Cabral speaking down on anybody. There's a story about one time he got on an airplane. He met one of the traitors, one who was supposed to be with him at the beginning of the struggle, but he changed to the other side. He got on an airplane. So he came back. He said, "Yeah, I saw such and such on the airplane. That traitor." I cursed him out. They said, "What? Cabral cursed out? What'd you say?" I said, "You ain't no shame." So for him, the biggest word, the baddest curse word he could say is, "You don't have no shame." He never used curse words, and he's always smiling with people. And most people remember him always working. You know, sometimes I have to stand up 30 sometimes I say, "Please, Cabral, go get you some rest." And I was going among the people. So uh, some of the legacy of Cabral, as I said, I don't have the words to describe it, especially in the few minutes that we're talking. But every day, every single day, I'm learning more and more from the Samba Cabral. We're not into a cult of the personality at all. There are a number of great people who inspire us. Fidel Castro inspires us a lot. We know a lot about him. I had the opportunity to go to Cuba a couple of times to be my Che Guevara. Had the opportunity to go to the parts of Cuba where he carried out the own struggle, where he was the commander of the force. Secretary, been to Guinea several times. I'm a member of the PDG. Been to the PDG conference. I have a whole lot of respect. He inspires me. Matter of fact, a lot of decisions I make them because of some of the formulas the secretary gave us. He said, when you make decisions, look at the historical factor, look at the social factor, and look at the individual factor. So if you make a decision for yourself, it's going to hurt the society. Don't make that decision. But if society's making a decision, it will hurt the future generations. Don't make that because you're making a decision against the historical factor. I like to give the example. We have a lot of petroleum. If there was an imperialist country that came here, said, well, we would like to give all of you who are alive in the society 100 million safer if you to sell us the rights to this petroleum. And even the women who are pregnant with the unborn babies will open a bank account for them. I'm sure a lot of people want to vote for that. They'll even justify it. They say, okay, with this 100 million second, I can invest it and get some things that will make money for my children's children's children. But your grandchildren will condemn you. You sold their natural resource to a foreign company or any company. So you violate the historical factor. So and of course I've read more Secretary than Cabral because he wrote more than Cabral. There's a lot of writings by Secretary about how to organize at the local area and called qualifications of local power, of how to organize economy for the people, a revolutionary economy for the people. The books about women in society. books about religion and revolution. Many books. They could talk about 27 books, and I got all of them. And I've been studying them systematically for 40 years. So it's a lot of influence on me. Kwame Nkrumah, I read all of his books. I can't say all his speeches, but all his books. He has a lot of impact on me too. Been to Ghana a couple of times too. But every single day with the few books that Cabral wrote, I guess it's probably because I'm also among a lot of people who were with Cabral when he was still living physically, things like that. But it's also probably because of the organization I'm behind. But uh, I'm learning more and more from Cabral every single day. I'm proud to be in the party that Cabral organized. Now, I consider myself to be an Nkrumahist, a tourist, and a Cabralist. And the three of them were in the same place at the same time. After the coup in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah became the co-president of Guinea, and he lived in Villa Silly. And Cabral used to go visit him all the time, especially when he got ready to go travel or when he came back from traveling. They got a lot of advice from Nkrumah. And Nkrumah really had a lot of respect for Cabral. When Nkrumah observed, he helped to organize that CONCP, the Conference of Nationalist Organization in Portuguese colonies, which I mentioned earlier, was the coordinating body of the PAIGC, MPLA, Frelimo, MNSTP, who were carrying out people's armed struggles in three different parts of Africa. A lot of times they have their meetings on the sidelines of the meetings of the chiefs of the heads of states of independent African countries, Kwame Nkrumah, Secretariat, etc. But Nkrumah said we need to go further. You know, he was already helping organize. Nkrumah was a part of the Fifth Pan Africanist Congress in 1945, where they came to the agreement that Pan Africanism is an objective, not an ideology, not a movement. It means the total liberation and unification of Africa with scientific socialism. And in the party that Nkrumah helped to co-found the Convention People's Party in 1949, that was the objective. And the PDG, the Democratic Party of Guinea, was founded 2 years earlier, 1947, on the 14th of May. Of course, Ahmed Secretary was not the first secretary general, not even to say he was the third, but that was the objective of PDG. So you had these three comrades. The main base of the PIGC was the national secretary was in Conakry. The PDG opened up all the doors of the army barracks for the PDG for the PIGC. The PIGC learned a whole lot from the PDG. I said they're really like twin parties. But so there was a lot of political coordination going on. But when Kwame Nkrumah wrote the draft of what is called the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is online in English, I don't think it's in French online. He gave the manuscript to Cabral to get his opinion, since Cabral was involved in mass armed struggle, the People's War. Secretary gave his opinions, because that's where he's based. So if you look at who are really the masterminds, the architects behind organizing what is called an All African People's Revolutionary Party, it's Amilcar Cabral, it's Kwame Nkrumah, it's Secretary, and others. Now, people like Kwame Ture made great contributions, but they're not co-founders of it. They have to really move it forward, particularly in the diaspora, and to a certain extent in Africa. But it's the PIGC, the PDG, the CPP, together with SWAPO Namibia, Zan. I shouldn't start calling names, because if I don't call Zanu in Zimbabwe, you say, what's wrong? If I don't call the People's Democratic Justice Front in the Eritrea, you say, oh, you forgot about them. If I don't call the CCM in Tanzania, you say, oh. But I want to mention that we're really proud that on the 12th, the day before yesterday, no, 3 days ago now, when we met in Bafata, a delegation of the PDG, the Democratic Party of Guinea, of the Democratic African Revolution, part of Ahmed Secretary, was represented by the interim Secretary General, A-APRP, who came with the coordinator of the Revolutionary Youth of the Democratic African Revolution, CRDA. There were five of them all together who participated. So it's really good to see them together with the PIGC, because I think that these parties working together really have pushed forward for us to have a mass revolutionary all African People's Party in Africa with the diaspora, because of both of them also work with the diaspora. So with you all in the us, not just you all, you are us in the Black Alliance for Peace, those of us who are in the the Unified Socialist Party of Venezuela, PSUV, the Communist Party of Cuba and its mass organizations, the Communist Party of China, the Communist Party of Vietnam will organize against anti-imperialism. But the level of the African Revolution, whatever it's called, it doesn't have to be called the name that Nkrumah proposed, the All African Bureau, but you got to have a mass revolutionary Pan-Africanist party in Africa that has its mass women's organization, its mass youth organization, its mass workers organization, and its mass People's Revolutionary Armed Forces. And that's that constant politicization, taking over the radios, the televisions of the African Revolution, the newspapers, the social media, the curriculum in the schools, etc. All the social institutions. It's coming because of our culture. Because our culture comes from a culture of those who want to unify, those who want dignity, those who have their own identity, the revolutionary African personality. So we really gave thanks to Cabral for giving us this example. And I'm a witness that there are a lot of people who are following the example. I'm also a witness having gone into many, many schools, particularly in Guinea-Bissau, but even outside of Guinea-Bissau. I've been to schools even in the U.S. and had the opportunity to give presentation in classrooms or in the auditoriums of the university. You start talking about them, the people are really hungry to find out more. In Guinea-Bissau, I've been to just about every university and high school several times. And once you start talking about Cabral, they never get tired of listening. So the spirit of Cabral, not in the spooky sense, the manifestation of our culture, it was manifested by his example. It's alive. It's becoming stronger and stronger every day. And that's one of the forces that brought about the victory last June 2023, where the party of Cabral didn't have money. It was being persecuted, whose leaders were being arrested, people being beaten. I was in the party headquarters when they attacked us with tear gas. People had to jump off from the second floor down to the ground. Other people choking from the gas that came from the Zionists in Israel. That same people whose Congress was attacked with arms gave an overwhelming majority, what they call an absolute majority to the party with all of the obstacles against us. So it's not a color personality at all. It's the example he gave us. The Cabral said that I know they want to kill me, but it's too late. You got many Cabrals come along, and you all must go even higher than me, do more than me. So that's what our struggle is to get to the level of. We can't do the exact same things he did. We can't fight against Portuguese colonists because they've been fought against and whipped. But in the area of studying hard, put into practice, being among the people all the time, learning from the people, joining the people that our sacrifices because we are one of the people. We can do that. In the area of taking the strategies and developing them more with more tactics, the area of organizing in the world, particularly in Africa, we could do that because there's still some countries that don't have revolutionary mass parties, and those who are in the diaspora can certainly learn from this, especially in the area of identity and having mass organization organized around our culture. Because I'm also a witness, and I go to places like Cuba, the U.S., even in Europe. And I go to see the African communities in Britain or Portugal. It's clear that the African culture, what we call African culture, is strong, despite all the propaganda from the television station that boom, 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 24 hours a day, despite all the miseducation in the classroom, African culture is there. So we got to organize our people around that culture. In the rural areas of Mississippi, it's like Africa. My mother and father were born there. I had the opportunity to spend many, many months there as a child and as a youth. In some places in rural Mississippi, I think that what we call African culture is stronger than some of the cities in Africa. But we have to build upon that organization. I think that some of us miss that. Going among our people in the rural areas where our culture is even stronger to organize ourselves, mass organization, like Cabral did. And maybe I'm rambling a little bit too much, but my brother and Cadre, I just want to let you know that I don't have enough words to describe the greatness of Cabral. Of course, now there were some mistakes he made. We learned from those too. That's what he wanted us to do. He always told us criticism, self criticism is a principle. Collective leadership is a principle. We must all feel like that we're all one body. The party is one body, and we're part. Whatever anybody does to hurt us, it hurts us all.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.